Hey, thank you for joining us, Sharks Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. Are you leveraging data for your campaigns? And how well do you know if it's clean data? When's the last time, after all, that you scrubbed it for accuracy? I mean, truly scrubbed it, especially considering the amount of inputs that go into customer data sets. Josh McGrail is a vice president at Accudata Integrated Marketing, and he's a subject matter expert in leveraging data for behavioral analytics and strategic audience targeting. And on this episode, we'll discuss the need for accurate data for targeting and analytics, how some marketers are using data best across platforms in B2C and B2B, as well as how not all agencies are alike in their data skill sets. So let's tune in to a strategic Josh with an accurate shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you will, tell us a little bit about your background and your career thus far.
Sure, Shark. Thanks. It's great to be here. I have been working in various aspects of marketing, advertising, and database marketing for about 20, a little over 20 years at this point. I've got a background in broadcast and media type, traditional advertising, public events and promotions around that. And for the last long while have been in and out, but primarily in with Accudata Integrated Marketing, where I'm a vice president in our strategic accounts group. My background in data-driven marketing has largely been with bigger sort of enterprise end-user clientele, kind of getting into their business goals and how to use all the different aspects of multi-channel data that have evolved over the years to help them reach and hopefully exceed those goals.
So, over the years, we've had a lot of the bigger players, the Axioms, the Experians, the Epsilons. But, one of the things that I think really changed the landscape for marketers are there are so many, new companies and there's so much access to data out there. But what have you seen over your career as to really the influx of other companies like your own, but also, just players in the space and where they're able to bring in and leverage data?
Yeah, there's been a lot of evolution in the whole business over those many years. It started out that you really had those larger type compilers who were the originators of data sets that you mentioned, and also list owners of various types, subscription-based or purchase-oriented, response data sets, they called them, the list managers who served them and helped them get their data out and sold. And then, of course, you had the brokers who kind of put all of the above together. Then came into the space all these sort of technology integrators that took different aspects of those types of data and companies and made them more accessible to different marketers. But today, there's been this huge explosion in all things digital, and that includes not just the ability to create a company, brand a company, and service clients, but also a lot of different means of generating data. And I think that it's created a lot of really cool, really exciting sort of metadata around online behaviors and activities on the consumer side, around ability to track prospects and work them through an account-based marketing type process on the business side. But I still believe that the sort of traditional direct marketing mindset of building a provable, trackable model, testing it, adjusting it based on those results, and then carrying it forward is still really the proven method that everybody can take into their campaigns and into their plans.
Think how many times you've seen in the last year, a data-driven marketer on a resume versus 5 years ago, how much it's just exploded as something that people are putting on their resumes. It's kind of like saying blockchain, this year is data-driven marketing a
Right.
few years ago. But
Data scientists,
yeah,
that's a big
exactly,
one.
rocket surgeon. But when you think of where data is today, help me fill in the gaps, if you will, on the types of companies that are using data well to reach their customers.
Uh, I think it covers a lot of ground. In my own business, I see retailers doing a lot of really cool things with data, in particular in loyalty applications. Although I do sometimes see them getting what I consider to be a little sidetracked on digital. Digital first doesn't necessarily need to be digital only,
Agreed.
and where they're missing opportunities to connect sort of ethereal online behaviors to actual people and actual customers because they haven't built the linkage between the two. That can be a challenge, but overall, I think retailers are pretty forward-thinking and aggressive in their use of data and technology. We also actually work with some financial companies, some insurance companies that I think do a great and fairly traditional job of applying analytics and sort of decision science to building target audiences. In the B2B space, I've seen particularly technology, telecom type marketers doing a great job ingesting large data sets, looking at things like corporate linkage and financial relationships that really empower their sales teams in their marketing efforts to connect with the right people across a wider organization. So just from my own experience, those are a few of the areas that
Sure.
I think are using data well.
So if you had to look at campaigns just sort of at a high level, and if you look at where data is being used on the before, creating personas, starting to target your audience, the during, the middle part where people are seeing data and react upon, campaign triggers that change that, or the after with the campaign measurement on how someone performed. Where do you, just taking a look back at that sort of broadly scoped before, middle, and after, where do you see that doing, where marketers are doing that the best now?
So I would say my personal perspective on kind of how all this relates and how everybody can increase their effectiveness across each of these steps, but in particular at that attribution point, is planning ahead for an adjoining piece or pieces of data that will create this sort of chain of linkage. So, for example, within Facebook, you have a lot of targeting abilities that a lot of us are familiar with, but they only really sort of exist within Facebook and are only able to be used for any sort of attribution in a very, very limited way. So if you're driving people to a set of URLs, or if you've got a retail business, for example, and you've got in-store traffic coming in as well, if they're not redeeming an online coupon that you sent to them on their device, there's really not a great method of attributing where those marketing dollars have gone, what's worked, and in particular building out those segments so you can develop a persona, so you can really deliver the personalized experience that all kinds of omni-channel shoppers and users are looking for. For example, if you go from a social ID to a hashed email, and then you can match a hashed email to another email which is hashed in the same way, and then you can reverse an email to a name and an address, a telephone number. It's just kind of a speculative process there, but if you plan ahead with your marketing team or with your database marketing provider for a sort of chain of linkage that allows you to adjoin the responders to the target audiences, regardless of what media they were engaged with, or regardless of what media they came in and maybe conducted or converted business based upon, I think you can be a lot more successful at each one of those three waypoints because it goes back to that sort of original direct marketing concept of a trackable, provable, testable method.
So at least from a B2C perspective, for the most part, there's a ton of consumer data out there. But when you look
Hmm.
at B2B, the landscape is different with B2B. Where do you see, sort of similarities and some differences with how people can use data to or leverage data when targeting B2C and or B2B?
Yeah, so, well, there's a lot. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of difference, and hopefully, Shark, we get the opportunity to get more into some of the details as we talk. But I would kind of frame it up in this way that the obviously the consumer data sets are larger and generally more robust in terms of selectivity than their B2B counterparts, but it's because they're generally used in different ways. I would say, for the most part, business to business data sets are really created for the purpose of sort of features and alignment based type advertising to business audiences who are primarily making logical decisions in the buying process. Consumer data, in large part, is configured more with behavioral, attitudinal, interest-based type data set because it supports a much larger set of emotional appeals for different types of businesses to consumers. So I think that really drives a lot of the difference in the types of compilations that support each. B2B decision makers are making business decisions. People at home are making their own personal decisions. It's a very different approach, and it requires different types of data to support either.
So, what are some of the guidance and best practices you give if a marketer wants to target decision makers at a company? What's sort of the best practice of how to get to them?
Uh, I generally start with what the goals for a campaign look like. Reaching a decision maker can mean a lot of different things if the decision maker is a CEO, for example, versus an administrator who, maybe is dealing with office supply buying decisions. But generally speaking, some of the larger B2B data sets like Info Group or Dun& Bradstreet, for example, have done a pretty good job of building out very, very wide files, and they've expanded their depth over these last few years. But there's always been a traditional concern around accuracy of the contact names in specific title and functional roles. Some of those are just very difficult to keep up with, especially depending upon the size of the organization that you're after. Now, to be fair, most American businesses are what you could call small businesses, generally speaking. So in those cases, it's usually a lot easier to keep up with the right person because they're not going to change as much. But if you're after sort of a larger enterprise market, getting to the right functional contact is every bit as important as getting to the right company itself. So starting out with company level data that you've gotten from, say, a D&B, for example, or a number of other optional providers, is a great way to do the segmentation and that sort of firmographic targeting. But to get to the right individual within that company, oftentimes is still going to take some combination of sort of old-fashioned sales effort. And from a data standpoint, you can match and enhance those records with sort of better contact data, frankly, through more of a response-based type of sourcing. And there are a lot of those lists out there that fall into that sort of traditional list management, list brokerage type category. But in addition to it, there are a wide variety of these online and event-based data sets today, whether they're attendees at various types of targeted shows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can use digital location-based technology to capture mobile ID level contacts for people who are at an event or at a location during a particular time that are a very targeted audience. And if you can reach an individual through their mobile device, then you're really reaching that individual. Some of the headaches that people run into are sort of IP-based digital targeting in consumers works great because generally speaking, you can get them to a household level, but a household equivalent for a business is a building. So that's an ineffective means of reaching an individual or a targeted group within a B2B audience. So again, I think it's kind of a combination of approaches, but you want to let it be guided by your goals with the recognition that dependence on contacts within a B2B compilation data set is generally not, in my opinion, the most effective targeting that you can apply. However, it does scale well.
Sure.
So there are kind of strengths and weaknesses across different media and different data that you can bring to bear.
Let's dive a little bit further then. Across the different types of media, where are you seeing data being used the best across individual channels? Which ones are you seeing perform the best?
Well, there's a couple of areas that I think I've come across that are interesting recently. One is that reverse matching. Several different providers offer that. I've recently come across a couple who I think do a significantly better job, believe it or not, than D&B or some of the really big shops there. Where it's appropriate, maybe for an insurance offer where reaching a wider swath of people in a company is desirable. Um, from an analytics standpoint, I've also seen people, particularly in some financial markets that I work with, but I think would apply more broadly, taking a smart analytic approach. Because, for example, in consumer data, there's not only a larger audience, but there's so many more selections and points of data on an individual or household. Segments can be applied much differently. Personas are already sort of pre-existing, and you can apply those from many different data sets. In B2B, that's not really the case. You're working with a more limited set of data elements that's going to match to your target audience at any usable rate. So I think applying, or I should say creating segments in the first place is a good first step to a successful campaign based in analytics, and then letting those segments build out propensity models in each of those segments has been a smarter analytic approach that I've seen really evolve over the last couple of years. Again, taking in factors like company size, industry, local economy, geographic type data points. There's a lot that you can do in B2B marketing, but if you're going to do it well, and again, I've primarily seen financial marketers doing this, you want to start out by building that equivalent of a business persona in the form of a segment, and then developing individual propensity models for each of those. It just seems like it's been a successful approach, and I think it's a lot more manageable in terms of tracking and really accounting for how successful each of those cells have been in a campaign.
Then, Josh, when we look at it from a business to consumer level, where are you seeing the best channels perform when using data? Is it email, some other form? What are you seeing out there?
I think all channels are still very viable, and I strongly buy into the notion that they work best when they play together. Again, kind of going to that concept of linkage between channels that I talked a little bit about, but there are a lot of means of targeting people existent within a compiled or a specialty or a response type of data set that you can layer these sort of digital behaviors into. The key to being successful in reaching people is not just targeting. I would remind everybody who's listening, it's also accurate contact data. NCOA, obviously, a lot of people are familiar with and is a very common, in fact, required method of reaching people by direct mail. But I see a lot of people forget the importance of cleaning up their email data sets, being sure that their digital targeting is still aligning the right person with the right device or location. I think good targeting has always been about analytics and looking at wider sets of behaviors across all the inputs that you can get. But good outreach is still about getting the right person through the right channel at the right time. And in order to do that, for example, one of the tools that I've seen a lot of success with and have really made some huge gains in year-over-year client kind of consistent campaign performance has been email validation. There are a lot of services out there and have been for a long time that are using this sort of ping technology, if you will, where you get back a certain set of information, but it isn't really robust around potential malicious submissions within a data set, spam traps, or latency within a data set that become issues. I had, and probably a lot of us had, an AOL account or something like that at one time, which has gone into disuse and may very well have been a valid customer email submission at the time, but since has probably become basically a recycled trap, they call it in a data set. So if you haven't been proactive about keeping your email contact data set clean, deliverable, and engaged, you hit that record, and it's going to diminish your inboxing across all the rest of your campaign because those ISPs are going to basically negatively score you as a sender. So that's just one example of how I think campaigns are effectively using data, not just on the front end in terms of the targeting and the actual build out of the audience, but in the actual delivery itself. You've got to have a plan around doing it clean.
So when marketers come to you today and they tell you that they want to target and build out an audience that they want to hit with their advertising, kind of walk us through where you start and where you finish. I mean, I'm assuming that most people are giving you a first-party data file. You're helping build out a model, and then pin some data to that, build out a larger scale. But talk a little bit about what you're doing to help marketers create those audiences to deliver to a publisher to serve ads.
Yeah, you bet. So it takes a lot of different forms depending on what the goals for a campaign look like. But generally speaking, it's some combination, exactly as you said, of looking at the first-party data. I think it's just kind of a truism that your own customers are the best audience that you've got. So you can always build out segments. You can build out intelligence based upon that. But there's a lot of additional means of acquiring competitive customers or identifying people who are actively in the process of responding to competitive advertising or in-category content that are all opportunities to target new audience. So I definitely think that there's a strong role for analytics in looking at your first-party data and then building that out by applying different third-party data points to it and doing modeling around that. But I also think that there's a lot of behavioral triggered type targeting tools available out there. One that we oftentimes work with here at Accudata is based in email response. So through a whole series of links and ad cookies, we are basically able to identify when a consumer respondent to someone else's third-party advertising email takes a click-through engagement. And you can be very specifically targeted toward competitor brand names, toward categories for each and every specific campaign. If you then go through that process of adjoining those digital first responders to postal, phone, other channels of contact data, then you've got yourself a uniquely targeted and behaviorally based audience that you can pull into a campaign that you've also built modeling and other segments out around.
So when somebody brings you data, what typically are the sizes of the files that they're bringing to you with X number of customers? And sort of what do you think is an optimal size so that you can start building out? I mean, obviously there's a different number for launching a campaign versus building out a model, but what do those numbers look like typically to you that you've seen?
It's all over the board, frankly, Kenneth. There's, it's going to depend on what you want the analytics to do and how far you want it to scale.
And how stingy the advertisers are with their data, because I've worked with some Fortune 200 who would, it was like pulling teeth to get a small file out of them.
Right. That can be a serious challenge. There's a lot of vetting around security issues, obviously, these days,
Absolutely.
which, although it does kind of slow down projects, obviously, establishing that comfort level is key. But, I work with a very large household retail brand that provides us with tens of millions of their loyalty records that we can do segmentation around. We help clean up their email data set. That scales obviously very well because what they wanted to do is be a nationwide, if not prospectively even pushing into a global size project. And I also work, for example, with a small regional financial brand that has a very small customer data set, but the targeting that they're after is extremely niche. So being very focused on a smaller audience in a particular geography can actually help you tease out some more useful analytic insights than if you tried to compare that with, an entire national audience. So it's variable. I generally tell people when they ask me that you need to have at least call it 1,000 records, give or take, for a consumer analytic process to be of any real impact. Maybe less, maybe even as small as 500, 600 for a business project to have any effective impact.
Sure.
But again, it's going to kind of be guided by the goals for the program and for the analytics.
We covered a little bit about how people were skeptical of sometimes releasing data. And there are a lot of companies there are a lot of marketers out there who don't understand or believe in, big data as a whole and being able to take data to build bigger data sets. But are you
Mhm.
running into that much today, or is it just, really scaled down to where you've got a more educated marketing force? There are a lot of creative agencies out there who have their hooks in with companies who don't understand a lot about data, and I'm sure there's an edification that you have to do on your part, as I did in the past as well, with companies to try to help explain some of the real capabilities of creating larger data sets and being able to trust a data provider.
You're really right. There's a few things involved there. I think, firstly, from a data security protection vetting standpoint, there's a lot of best practices in place, maintaining files encrypted at rest, a million other things. GDPR, new California regulations prospectively coming online change that space a little bit. But the compliance issue can be proved out through question and answer, through some careful vetting. So usually I've found, and I think my colleagues have found, those are able to be addressed in terms of concerns. But you bring up an interesting point with the concept about very robust digital agency market, a lot of creative going on out there that is really exceptionally well done from an imaging and from just the whole package standpoint of the visuals of the campaign, audio, whatever combination it is. But to my mind, putting all of that effort into designing creative without firstly understanding how the target market talks about the product or the issue themselves and using the same kinds of words and concepts to present it to them in your advertising is a miss, and that can be certainly
Agreed.
aided with some data analytics and research. And secondarily, to analogize it, I feel it's sort of like, I've made this beautiful kid, I've raised him as far as I can. I'm just going to drop him off at school and
Right.
then kind of assume everything's going according to plan without any follow up. Because if you put your sweat equity and your creative effort into creating some outstanding media for a campaign, some involvement and some understanding of how it's going to be targeted, how it's going to either reach the right audiences or not, would seem to me like the next logical step. And certainly, there's a lot of opportunity for data providers and analytics companies to partner with digital agencies and with these creative minds. And I think the companies that are doing it best are really trying to bring this together in one place. Companies like Accudata, where I'm at, for example, have added a lot of robust digital creative support, but frankly are not to the level of a much larger agency in that space. Whereas I think much larger agencies are kind of getting in the habit of recognizing that there's something about big data that's interesting, but they're only looking at a small portion of a much wider and very well established market to build that out.
Well, the data science and digital marketing advanced much more quickly than the knowledge or calming affairs of marketers out there. Talk about the value, if you will, of having accurate data, because there's so many players out there in the space who claim to know data because of what is available out there, but having good data is make or break your campaign.
Amen. I couldn't agree more strongly. And I think to the part of our conversation where we were talking about huge growth in the market and tough to keep up with and trust issues around that, there has been kind of a long-standing abuse of that knowledge gap by people who claim some type of expertise or some type of highly specialized data that just doesn't prove out to be what it was claimed to be. I think a lot of brand marketers have been sort of, you know, burned to some extent by that over the years, and so it's created some hesitancy and some bad taste. Generally speaking, just as you said, data accuracy is either a make or break for a campaign. But if you're working with somebody either internally in your company or with any partners, somebody who will be transparent with you about the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs of whatever data it is that you're working with is critically important. You might assume that people who are clicking through on some particular piece of content are going to be perfectly targeted for you. Well, they may be, but there's certainly no guarantee of that. So that is one type of behaviorally based data accuracy concern. You might also have completely inaccurate age or birth date on a compiled file. I did a lot of work with a retail client in which we were appending multi-sourced date of birth to their customer house file because they wanted to basically launch a sort of postcard loyalty campaign around birthdays. And it was very interesting to see you could have the same customer with a totally different date of birth across 3 or 4 different consumer compilations. So that's not to say that larger consumer compilations are doing a poor job in building out their data, and or that we could just skip that because certainly there's a lot of use for that type of data. But if you can build out a solution with that knowledge and with that experience to say prioritize a double confirmed birthday, for example, over one that just appears on a single file, do some testing around that. It's kind of about looking for limitations within the data that are just inherent due to its sourcing. I've yet to meet a data set that is completely 100%, but then
So true.
building out a strategy to test through it and do what makes sense, and at the end of the day, do what's performing for you and for your brand.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, unfortunately, a mistake that a lot of people make when they've got a big Excel or a CSV file, they don't understand that data is fluid and that it's never 100% accurate because you're looking at it a moment in time and things change. People move, they pass away, they change their email, their phone number, whatever, and it's a moment in time. You've got to have that strategy built around it. So I couldn't agree with you more. So, Josh, now's the time to ask you the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today. Are you ready?
Hit me. Let's do it.
Mexican Riviera or Redneck Riviera?
Uh,
And we're talking Biloxi to Panama City.
Yeah, I'm going Redneck Riviera. I'm a Florida State guy. I'm very comfortable. I'd love to be there right now, as a matter of
Amen.
fact.
IHOP or Waffle House?
You know, I'm going Waffle House just because I have more background with the brand, and I think the yellow thing has got kind of a classic feel to it,
Well, it is Florida, so I mean, when you're in the South,
right?
Waffle House is a staple.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's huge.
that's where all the good fights and everything happen. So save the Dolphins or save the
Exactly.
whales.
Ooh, man, that is a tough one. I guess if there were a conflict between the two, I'd go pro Dolphins
If
on
they got
that.
in a
I just
fight,
you got to love them. It's like a dog in the
right?
ocean.
You got to love one named Flipper. So Darth
Yeah, come on.
Darth Vader or Yoda?
Tough. You know what? I'm gonna go Yoda because you got to go for the good guy, but Darth Vader's got a real cool factor going on.
He does. Man in Black. So the most important question you're going to be asked today: biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits, man, biscuits. Well, with gravy. And neither one of them are dry. Let's assume neither one of them are dry. But if I can get gravy with those biscuits all day, every day.
Awesome.
If all I've got is butter to work with, cornbread makes a case for itself.
Josh, thank you so much. Tell us where we can follow you, find out more about your thoughts, your expertise, and your practice.
So my most active social media is actually LinkedIn. My name is Joshua McGrail. I'm at Accudata, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I post pretty regularly. I would love to answer any questions or have any other interaction with anybody in follow-up to this or other conversations. I am also, as I mentioned, a vice president at Accudata Integrated Marketing. You can go to our website at accudata.com, and you can give us a call anytime. I would be more than happy to talk.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh, so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
So there was my conversation with Josh McGrail, the Vice President at Accudata Integrated Marketing and a subject matter expert in leveraging data for behavioral analytics and strategic audience targeting. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with him. First, I thought Josh brought up a good point that's also a great reminder. When you think of leveraging data and building your strategy, digital first doesn't necessarily mean digital only. It's easy to look at the aggregate of consumer behavior online, but don't forget how the customer may act differently in an offline world. Marketers often miss when not looking at the linkage between the data and all the channels. Second, regardless of how good that you think your targeting is, a key to being successful in reaching people is having accurate data. Seriously, think about when's the last time that you cleaned up your email database. In a typical campaign, analytics gives you a look back at how your targeting performed. Just with an email campaign, though, as an example, remember that good outreach is getting the right person on the right channel at the right time, and a lot of that depends on your verification of email addresses. Whatever type of campaign, there are so many ways that your data can get messy. You simply have to have a plan around doing it clean. Third, data science and digital marketing have advanced so much so quickly. Let's face it, not all agencies understand how to use data correctly. It's not simply taking a file and loading it into Facebook, for example. So make sure that any agency with any input on your data truly understands how to use that data. I say that because you have to remember that having good data will make or break your campaign. Don't assume that the people clicking through were perfectly targeted. For example, you might have completely inaccurate birthdays or age. It's not a fault, just a reminder that data has a lot of inputs, and I mean a lot. Look for limitations in your data and then look for a strategy to test through it in order to perform best for you and for your brand. Remember that data is fluid. It's never 100% accurate. What you're looking at is only a moment in time. Just have the strategy built around that fluidity. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. I'm honored that you chose to spend time with me on this podcast to discuss another one of many components that makes up marketing today. And in the words of the late, great Robin Williams, what it is, what it was, and what it shall be. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.